Some WWE superstars weren't just released, they were completely erased from history. Entire matches were cut from archives, names removed from commentary, and storylines rewritten as if they never existed. But why would WWE go so far as to pretend certain wrestlers were never in their ring? The answer isn't just bad behavior, it's about protecting legacies, rewriting narratives, and controlling what fans are allowed to remember. Take Chyna, for example. Her story might be the most complicated and heartbreaking in WWE history. She wasn't just a female wrestler. She was a trailblazer. She was the first woman to regularly fight men, the first to win the Intercontinental Championship, the first to enter the Royal Rumble, and as a founding member of D-Generation X. She helped define one of WWE's most iconic eras. But behind the scenes, her world was collapsing. Chyna was in a real-life relationship with fellow DX member Triple H, but that ended when Triple H grew close to Stephanie McMahon, Vince's daughter, during a storyline. Chyna later said she found love letters and everything unraveled. Her relationship ended, and so did her place in the company after she confronted Stephanie and Vince, who already knew what was happening. This wasn't just a breakup, it was corporate politics at the highest level. Triple H was on the fast track to power, and Stephanie was wrestling royalty. One former WWE writer even admitted that he accidentally pitched the storyline that brought Triple H and Stephanie together without realizing it would destroy Chyna's personal life and career. When her contract came up in 2001, things turned ugly. Vince McMahon reportedly offered her $400,000 a year, but Chyna asked for $1 million, the same amount top male stars were earning. Jim Ross called that demand outrageous, even considering Chyna's star power, but her sister later revealed the deal could have earned her much more through merchandise and pay-per-view bonuses. Chyna stood her ground, her offer was rejected, and she walked away. What followed was a painful public downfall, reality TV appearances, addiction, mental health struggles, and eventually a turn to adult films, including the infamous backdoor to Chyna that became WWE's unofficial excuse for blacklisting her from history. Triple H even said he didn't want kids Googling Chyna's name and finding inappropriate content. But this is where the hypocrisy really stings. Val Venis literally played a porn star on WWE TV, X-Pac, Triple H's real-life friend from The Click, co-starred in Chyna's first sex tape and faced no consequences. And WWE went on to induct Mike Tyson, Donald Trump, and Snoop Dogg, all of whom had ties to adult content, into the Hall of Fame, but Chyna was left out in the cold. Yes, she was finally inducted in 2019, but only as part of D-Generation X, and by then it was too little, too late. She had passed away 3 years earlier and never got to hear the cheers or receive the tribute she had earned. If her on-screen career was controversial, the backlash backstage was even worse. Ken Shamrock, the former WWE and UFC star, once said one of the reasons he left was because he didn't want to wrestle Chyna, saying it went against his personal values and that he simply didn't want to get in the ring with her. So even while she was breaking barriers, there were people inside WWE quietly pushing back. Fans still argue she deserved a solo induction, and they're right. Chyna broke down walls for every woman on today's roster. She redefined what a woman could do in a wrestling ring and paid the price for not fitting WWE's mold at the time. She deserved better, and deep down, even WWE's higher-ups know it. Now let's talk about Sunny. Sunny's story isn't just tragic, it might be the most heartbreaking fall from grace in WWE history. Back in the 90s, she was everywhere. The first true diva and the original pinup of the Attitude Era at her peak. She was an internet icon, and in 1996, she was named the most downloaded woman in the world, even beating names like Pamela Anderson and Jennifer Aniston. That's how big Sunny was. Eventually, in 2011, she was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, but after that, everything fell apart. To understand her spiral, you have to go back to 1998. By then, WWE had grown tired of her behavior. She was missing events, showing up late, and constantly offering excuses. Substance issues were already part of the story, and WWE asked her to go to rehab, but she refused. Then came one of the strangest behind-the-scenes moments. Sunny reportedly told Linda McMahon she had a miscarriage, but couldn't provide any medical proof. That was the final straw for WWE, and they let her go. Things only spiraled from there. Between 2012 and 2016, Sunny was arrested over and over again, including 5 times in just 4 weeks at one point, mostly for duos. It was a brutal cycle of addiction, chaos, and negative headlines, and the worst part was that no one seemed able to stop it. Then came the most devastating chapter. In March 2022, Sunny caused a fatal car crash while driving under the influence. Her blood alcohol level was 4 times the legal limit. There was an open bottle of vodka in the car, and cannabis was found in her system. Tragically, 75-year-old Julian Lassiter lost his life because of her reckless actions. In November 2023, Sunny was sentenced to 17.5 years in prison. She went from internet queen to WWE Hall of Famer to inmate, and there may be no WWE story more tragic than hers. Now, let's talk about the Ultimate Warrior, who began his WWE career in 1987 and quickly became one of the company's biggest stars thanks to his high-energy entrances, colorful face paint, and explosive wrestling style. Fans loved his larger-than-life personality, and one of his most iconic moments came in 1990 when he defeated Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6 to win the WWE Championship. At the peak of his career, Warrior even held both the Intercontinental and WWE Championships at the same time, a huge accomplishment at the time. But behind the scenes, things weren't as smooth. In 1991, Warrior had his first major issue with WWE when, before SummerSlam, he demanded a $500,000 pay raise, the same amount Hulk Hogan was getting, and even threatened not to show up unless he was paid. Vince McMahon agreed, but then suspended Warrior right after the event. This demand created tension between Warrior and WWE, and soon Vince fired him, ending Warrior's first run. He returned in 1992, but his comeback was short-lived. That same year, WWE was under investigation for steroid use, and Warrior was involved in the scandal, leading to his second release. This made many people think he was unreliable and difficult to work with, further hurting his reputation. In 1998, Warrior attempted a comeback in WCW, reigniting his feud with Hogan, but it was a disaster. The matches were sloppy, the storylines were poorly written, and fans were disappointed. His Halloween Havoc match with Hogan was one of the most infamous flops in wrestling history. Outside the ring, Warrior was known for his eccentric behavior. He even legally changed his name to Warrior to keep the rights to his character and engaged in multiple legal battles with WWE throughout the 90s and early 2000s. He distanced himself from the wrestling world and became isolated from his former colleagues. In 2005, WWE released a documentary titled The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, which painted him in a very negative light and damaged his image even more. But in 2014, something surprising happened. Warrior reconciled with WWE. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame, appeared at WrestleMania 30, and delivered a heartfelt speech on Raw just days before he tragically passed away from a heart attack at the age of 54. His death made many fans reflect on his career, which had its share of highs and lows but still left a huge mark on wrestling. The Ultimate Warrior's journey was filled with big victories and major controversies. He rose to stardom quickly, but bad decisions, fights with management, and legal battles cut his career short. Despite all the setbacks, his character remains one of the most iconic in wrestling history, and his story is one of both triumph and struggle. The next entry on our list is one of those situations that might be true, but we'll probably never know for sure. Macho Man Randy Savage is considered one of the greatest wrestlers ever and is still loved by fans worldwide. Throughout his career, there was a lot of tension between Vince McMahon and Savage for several reasons. One of the longest-running rumors is that when Savage left WWE in late 1994, it was partly because he was involved with Stephanie McMahon at some point. Stephanie had just turned 18 in September of 1994, so if the alleged affair happened before that, she would have been underage, which made the rumor even more shocking since Savage was 25 years older than her. Savage is one of the very few names who left WWE for WCW and was never invited back. Vince McMahon brought back Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and even Eric Bischoff, the man who almost put WWE out of business, as well as others who had major issues with him, like Bruno Sammartino, Bret Hart, and the Ultimate Warrior. If Vince could reconcile with all of them, why not Savage? There had to be something more. Some reports claim Vince refused to work with him ever again, which has fueled speculation that the issue was personal, not business. Since Savage passed away in 2011 and Stephanie has never spoken about the rumor, the truth may never come out. Whether it happened or not, WWE clearly wants the subject to vanish. Fans once even chanted Randy Savage while Stephanie was accepting her Legacy of Excellence award, showing how strongly they still feel about the situation. Wee's refusal to address the rumor only makes fans believe it might be true, and with Savage essentially blacklisted during his lifetime, the mystery has only grown. We may never get answers, but the speculation probably won't go away anytime soon. Now let's move on to one of the most quietly heartbreaking exits in recent WWE history, AJ Lee's sudden retirement in 2015. AJ wasn't just good, she was incredible. She held the Divas Championship for a record-breaking 295 days, was a fan favorite, and one of the few women who truly stood out during a time when WWE gave most of the division very little attention. But her storybook run didn't end with fireworks or a farewell celebration, it ended in silence. And behind that silence was a storm connected to her marriage to CM Punk. Here's where things got messy. In April 2015, AJ Lee announced her retirement from pro wrestling. And while the official reason given was neck injuries, the Wrestling Observer reported that this was just a cover story. The real reason was the legal fallout between WWE and her husband, CM Punk, who had left the company a year earlier on bad terms and blasted WWE on Colt Cabana's podcast, accusing them of serious medical negligence, and to make matters worse, we fired him on his and AJ's wedding day. Soon after, WWE's Dr. Chris Among sued Punk for defamation, leaving AJ stuck in the middle of a battle she had nothing to do with. She hadn't done anything wrong, but being married to the man WWE now considered public enemy number one made her a target. Reports say AJ was forced to label her departure a retirement just to get out of her contract, not a release. Not a mutual agreement, because WWE didn't want her around, but also didn't want to let her go on her own terms. Even Jim Ross said he wasn't surprised, calling her situation uncomfortable after everything that happened with Punk. But here's where it gets even bigger. Right before leaving, AJ publicly called out Stephanie McMahon on Twitter over pay inequality, pointing out how WWE preached women's empowerment while still paying its female stars for less than the men. Stephanie tried to play it cool by thanking her for starting the conversation, but let's be honest, that kind of tension doesn't just disappear backstage. AJ Lee left quietly, with no farewell segment, no tribute video, nothing, but like her husband, she made sure her voice was heard before she was gone. Sable's story is another shocking one. She was one of the biggest breakout stars of the Attitude Era, joining WWE in 1996 and skyrocketing to fame almost overnight. Sable wasn't just there to look good. She became the second-ever women's champion and achieved a level of mainstream fame that most female wrestlers at the time couldn't even dream of. But in June 1999, at the height of her popularity, she walked out and hit WWE with a jaw-dropping $110 million lawsuit. The accusations were explosive. Sable claimed constant sexual harassment, unsafe working conditions, and pressure to expose herself on television, and on top of that, she alleged someone smeared human feces on her personal belongings and that male wrestlers punched holes in the women's locker room walls to spy on them while they changed. The lawsuit shook WWE, but then came the twist. Jim Ross suggested it wasn't just about mistreatment, and that Sable realized how much money she could make outside of wrestling with Playboy covers, merchandise, and talk show appearances, which suddenly made walking away from WWE seem like the smarter move. Jim Ross called the whole Sable lawsuit situation a kick in the balls, and just 2 months later, the case was quietly settled, with Sable giving up the rights to her name and reportedly being banned from wrestling for 3 years. But this is WWE, so in 2003 she returned, not quietly, but jumping right back into the same kind of risk storylines she had once sued the company over. Fans believe the reason Vince McMahon brought her back was simple. If it made money, personal drama didn't matter, and one person put it best, bringing someone back after a fallout made Vince feel like he won. Yet today, Sable's name seems to be quietly erased. When Torrie Wilson was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2019, she reportedly wasn't allowed to mention Sable during her speech, with some speculating it was because of Sable's marriage to Brock Lesnar, though nobody really knows. Looking at WWE's backstage treatment of women, it starts to make sense. Former writers have shared stories of gender discrimination, claiming female staff were touched inappropriately, ignored when reporting issues to HR, and even told not to bring it up again. Perhaps Sable's lawsuit wasn't just a headline-grabbing scandal, but the first time the curtain started to lift on these issues. Now, consider Gail Kim, who had one of the most underrated protest moments in pro wrestling history in 2011 during a live battle royal on Raw. She didn't just lose, she eliminated herself, rolling under the ropes and walking out with no drama, hesitation, or theatrics right in front of the cameras. And most people didn't even notice, making her point even stronger. Gail Kim was one of the most talented women WWE ever signed, with 2 separate runs, from 2002 to 2004, and then 2008 to 2011. But during that second run, it was clear she had had enough. The disrespect, lack of airtime, and constant cutting of women's matches left her seeing that her career there was going nowhere. On that night in 2011, before the Battle Royal, producers told her to get eliminated within the first minute, and that's exactly what she did. But in her own way, she walked up to Alicia Fox, told her to sell, and literally rolled out of the ring on her own, disappearing seconds after the match started in a silent act of rebellion. No promo, no speech. Gail Kim's exit was purely about sending a message, and WWE's reaction was almost more insulting than the treatment that led up to it. When she told John Laurinaitis what she had done, he laughed and said something like, "Yeah, I heard it was pretty underscore, with no fine, no suspension, just indifference." Gail later said, if it had been one of the men who eliminated themselves, they would have been punished, but because it was the women, nobody cared. She was forced to sit out the rest of her contract and eventually announced her departure on Twitter. And looking back, she said she believed Vince McMahon simply didn't like her, which makes sense given how underutilized she had been. But Gail Kim wasn't done. She went back to TNA and built one of the most respected careers in the Knockouts division, becoming a true legend on her own terms. Finally, one of the most shocking weekends in wrestling history came from June 22nd to June 24th, 2007, when Chris Benoit, a respected wrestler, tragically ended the lives of his wife Nancy and their 7-year-old son Daniel before taking his own life at their home in Fayetteville, Georgia. It began with cryptic text messages Benoit sent to friends, including fellow wrestler Chavo Guerrero, prompting a welfare check by the police, who then discovered the bodies. Nancy and Daniel were found with Bibles placed beside them, and the next day, Benoit had given Daniel Xanax to sedate him before suffocating him, with a Bible placed beside the child as well. And on June 24th, Benoit hanged himself in his home gym using a weight machine. This event shocked the wrestling community and fans worldwide, leading to intense scrutiny of WWE regarding concussions, drug use, and mental health. And experts soon discovered Benoit's brain had severe damage known as CTE, linked to repeated head injuries, which likely contributed to his actions, while elevated testosterone levels suggested steroid use. Though experts noted the deliberate nature of his crimes rather than roid rage, compounded by the emotional